Hey, hi, hello, how you doing? Today I am going to be talking about unreliable narrators. Since the 1960s, a new form of a narrator was classified, that being the unreliable narrator. However, an unreliable narrator has basically always existed within both movies and literature. An unreliable narrator can be classified as a narrator that misleads the reader, whether knowingly or unknowingly. We cannot trust these narrators when they tell us what happens in the story for a variety of reasons, whether it be that they are holding back information, are essentially lying to the reader or to themselves, to other characters, or misinterpreting or misremembering things within the story and relaying it this way to the reader. These are narrators who are often used within thriller genres as well as horror, but they exist throughout basically every genre. But especially thriller and horror are very popular contenders for having an unreliable narrator. Two examples of an unreliable narrator would be Norman Bates from Psycho, as well as the two narrators from Gone Girl. So as I said a second ago, an unreliable narrator can be unreliable for a variety of reasons. And as the term unreliable narrator has become more popular and is more being used with the intention of being unreliable, we have also put unreliable narrators into subtypes. These are not official subtypes, they are more so adapted by the community, and of course everybody will have their own interpretation of these subtypes. But as a writer, it can be very helpful to know when you're writing an unreliable narrator which subtype they would fall under. It can help you with structuring your story, as well as knowing who this narrator is and how their environment should react and interact with them. So today I will be going over each subtype and explaining to you what they are, as well as give you a few tips at the end on how to exactly write an unreliable narrator. The first subtype is the naive narrator. These narrators are made unreliable because of their lack of experience. They are often very young narrators, such as a child or a teenager, somebody who hasn't necessarily gotten a real taste of the world, so to speak. So these may also be people who are very isolated or highly protected by their parents to protect their innocence. Characters who have always been sheltered from the bad things within the world, or have always been told this fantasy story about what the world is really like, or still believe that fantasy stories, such as a child or a teenager, may fall under this category. These narrators may portray a situation to be much more lighthearted than it actually is, as well as more dangerous. They might panic in a situation that really is not that bad, because they may be easily intimidated or easily have a misconstrued perception of the situation that they are in. These may also be narrators who are more gullible to what other people tell them is going on, hence them being the naive narrator, and aren't yet always in a situation where they have formed their own opinion on what is going on. And when they do have their own opinion, it was often the result of misinformation put on top of misinformation put on top of misinformation that ultimately caused them to form their own opinion. These may be characters who, for example, have moved from a completely different country than the one that they were born in. Like if I were to move to America, I live in Europe. If I then had to go live there and narrate my story of my first impressions, of my first few months living there, I in the beginning could be considered a naive narrator because I'm very inexperienced with the culture there and everything of the sort. All I know is from the internet. I have never been there. And I would essentially have to rely on what people are telling me while I am there, as well as my own research, which would be purely based on interpretation as well as other people's lived experience. I would have to rely on other people's opinions, other people's experiences, and have to form my own opinion based on that, making me a naive narrator. Because I do not have enough experience of living in America that I can form my own opinion based off of my own experiences. Narrators can also be naive when they are in a situation where the conflict has literally just started. This isn't a situation where when we are introduced to it has been going on for a few months, has been going on for maybe a few years. They are just all of a sudden kind of just dropped into a completely unfamiliar situation, have no clue what is going on, and are just trying to survive. That can also cause somebody to be a naive narrator. The second type of unreliable narrator is the outsider. A good stereotype for this type of a narrator is the character who lives completely isolated on their own plot of land in the middle of nowhere and kind of just gets thrown into this situation with no clue as to what's going on and just wants to be left alone. Very similar to a type of anti-hero that you see throughout multiple books and movies. These narrators have set themselves apart from the rest of the crew / town / society because of a variety of reasons, whether that be their religious or political beliefs, the job that they do, the people that they hang out with, or even something like their background, or their race, or their gender. Something about them causes them to not be able to fit in with their environment. When everybody else is the color blue, they are a stark red in comparison. And there is no way for them to truly fit in with the rest of society because maybe society doesn't necessarily accept their different beliefs or the way in which they are different. It causes them to maybe not have all of the information that a person who does fit in properly would have. They don't get all of the juicy inside scoops. They get the information that they need, such as when the garbage bin is coming to pick up their garbage, but not the lives of the garbage people who are coming to pick up their trash. Well, that is something that everybody who is in on it, who is accepted, would know because they have much closer bonds. This causes them to not have all of the information that they need in order to tell the story properly. These are narrators who, throughout the course of the story, might be surprised multiple times with the information that they find out along the way, while the rest of the crew would be like, yeah, we already knew this. Everybody knows this except for you because you have put yourself apart from everybody else. These may also be narrators who have a lot of stereotypes surrounding them. This is the narrator, this is the person who has parents telling their kids creepy stories about the house that they live in, while he in reality just kind of lives on his own because his wife died from cancer. All of the town kids think that he killed his wife, and now the house that he lives in is haunted by her ghost. This is the woman who enters a job that is predominantly done by men, and the men who work in that field are not ready to welcome a woman into their workspace. This is the man who has to raise his daughter on his own because his wife passed away and is now a single father. They don't know what they are doing and are just trying to fit in, whether they want to or would rather be an outsider. Throughout the course of the story, they usually do not have a choice to at least partially try to fit in with the rest of society or whatever in order to get things going. The third type is the picaro. These are narrators who love to exaggerate the story. What really happened may not be newsworthy. This may not be something that people would consider them a hero for. So instead, they tell the reader the story with a little bit more of their personal flair. While it really was just raining pretty hard, the narrator will tell the reader that it was raining that badly that he couldn't see his own hand when he held it out in front of him. If there was an earthquake, but it wasn't enough to really destroy houses or anything like that, the exaggerator might say that the houses were shaking and almost falling to the ground, while that really wasn't true. It just felt like sitting in a massage chair, but nothing actually fell over, nothing actually major happened. They may take a small altercation and say that the other person just flew at him out of nowhere and was trying to put him in hospital. Sometimes these are narrators who will lie, other times they are narrators who won't outright lie, but they will stretch the truth as far as it can go, and they often do this with a specific reason in mind. Whether that be to make somebody look bad or make themselves look like either the victim or the hero of the story. They want something that by just telling the truth, they will never get, whether that be fame, notoriety, people talking about their story, or the person that he feels does not deserve the life that they have. They don't get their downfall if he tells the truth, if he sticks to what truly and really happened. Then there is the insane narrator. These are narrators who have lost touch to some degree with reality, and they tell the story from that perspective of not having touch with reality in the way that they should. A good example of this, again, is Norman Bates. He essentially had a mental break after his mom died and started killing people in a motel while dressing as and taking on the identity as his mother. In the final scene with the camera zooming in on him, we also know that he hears his mother's voice. And his mother was the whole reason that he went on this killing spree. In genres outside of something like fantasy or sci-fi, this is often a character who has some kind of a mental break, who has something like PTSD or schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, or any kind of mental health issue that can cause you to lose touch with reality. Even something like substance abuse, alcoholism. These are both things that if you do it for a long time can cause you to develop hallucinations, become paranoid, or anything of the sort. In fantasy or sci-fi novels, what we have seen before is a character being tortured into having psychosis or some type of a mental break. These are characters who have been brainwashed, oftentimes by the villain, into fulfilling some kind of a role, into becoming somebody else that is more convenient for them. A good example of a character like this, while he isn't a narrator, is Bucky Barnes. He was brainwashed to be the enemy of Captain America. In the movies, again, he is not a narrator, but if you were to put the stories in a book format, I know that there are comics, I've never read them, so I can't speak on this. If you were to put it in a book format and Bucky were to tell part of the story, he would be considered an insane narrator, because there are times that he's not fully in touch with reality. He was a character who was tortured into losing that major part of himself, into being able to reason properly. Because if he was thinking properly, he would not have attacked Captain America and be his opposition in the way that he was. He would not have tried to kill Captain America because he was his friend. Oftentimes these are stories that are told from multiple perspectives, one from the insane narrator and the other from a sane and reliable narrator, just to bridge the difference, because these are often characters who have truly lost their touch with reality a lot. And we, the reader, might have trouble keeping up with what is truly happening if it was just them telling the story. Next is the lying narrator. This is very obvious. These are the narrators who will straight up lie or hold back information about what happened. Again, these are narrators who are very popular within the thriller and horror genre. These are often the narrators in books that have these major plot twists when this piece of information gets revealed. I am actually reading a book like that currently with a narrator like that. I personally love these narrators because they truly know very well how to spin a story. Sometimes this can look like the narrator holding back information purely from the reader, but other times it can also look like the narrator holding back information from other characters and other narrators. Oftentimes the books with these narrators have multiple narrators, multiple points of views, and they might have multiple lying narrators who slowly but surely each tell a different part of the story to the reader. They very slowly reveal the information throughout the course of the story until by the climax we finally have all of the pieces of the puzzle. And then the last one is the biased narrator. These are narrators who tell a story that have a major case of confirmation bias. These are narrators that we oftentimes know are unreliable from the beginning of the story as the reader. These are often characters who have a very big ego, who might come across as very arrogant, or to put it in the way that people in Belgium, where I live, would say it, they have a fat neck, which is another way of saying that they're very arrogant and very self-centered, think very highly of themselves. They feel that they have figured everything out already from the start, while we as a reader know that they are completely and utterly wrong, because the evidence is staring them square in the face. They just refuse to admit that it's true. A character arc for this type of narrator would look like them slowly but surely facing the truth that what they always thought was wrong, and it will really, really suck for them. These characters start off being incredibly ignorant and again might be somewhat of an outsider because of these different beliefs that they have. They just pick and choose the information that they like, and the part of it that they don't like they just throw away in the trash, along with people's truly honest and right opinions. They might also try to convince the other characters in the story of their point of view, but slowly get faced with more and more evidence that kind of pushes them into a corner to where they slowly have to start believing that what other people are saying may have some value. A good example of this would be conspiracy theorists or flat earthers or anything of the sort. People who think that the presidents of the United States were all shape-shifting lizards, when clearly we have evidence that they are not. Some of these characters may do this in order to protect themselves from some kind of a truth that they don't want to face. Others are very much influenced by their environment. So how do you implement an unreliable narrator into your story? There are multiple ways to do this, and it really truly depends on your story. But there are 3 things that would span across every single story that an unreliable narrator would need. The first one being that they need a very clear reason to be unreliable. Every single part of your story needs to have a reason for being there. If there is a horse in your story that gets a lot of time on the page, there needs to be a reason that the horse is being talked about. Otherwise, it's just taking up space where you can just cut it and lower your word count. Same way, your character needs to have a reason for being unreliable, and they also need to have a clear reason for why they are the subtype that they are, one of the ones that I talked about at the beginning. If they are a lying narrator, the information that they hold back needs to have a very clear impact on the reader and the plot once the information comes to light. If they're a character who is insane, who has lost touch with reality, let's say that they have schizophrenia, the fact that they have schizophrenia needs to be an integral part of the plot. If that has nothing to do with the plot whatsoever, if it is a fantasy novel about trying to find some sort of an artifact or a book and the schizophrenia really has nothing to do with it, you just add it as a fun quirk, it really should not be there. Not only is it incredibly disrespectful, but it has no reason to be there. If you just made the narrator biased because you don't want them to be the best person, but it doesn't have any other reason, then a biased narrator may not be the way to go. If they're unreliable because, for example, they lost their memories, the motivation for them throughout the course of the story could be to recover these lost memories. Are the memories missing because they need to be revealed in a big plot twist? Or do they reveal something about the character that we can't know until later on? These are all very valid reasons to have an unreliable narrator. But if you don't have a valid reason, then you should go for a reliable narrator, because otherwise it can just get frustrating for the reader. 2. Use multiple points of view. An unreliable narrator gives us a skewed version of events, and in some instances it may be better to also have a character who gives us the true version of events, a character who doesn't lie to us in the way that the unreliable narrator does. Whether they are realizing that they are lying or not is a whole different conversation. Doesn't really matter either, because we may in some instances still need the real truth, the real version of events to understand the story, as well as in some cases it being integral to us having a bond with the unreliable narrator. If it is a case of multiple characters holding multiple pieces of the puzzle, as I said earlier with the lying narrator, then we also need multiple points of view in order for us to piece together the whole story. It can also change our perspective on the story that we are reading. But sometimes we need that extra perspective in order to properly form our own opinions, and oftentimes it makes a story much more interesting because we get to know more about what it is that this unreliable narrator is truly thinking and their thought processes and how they line up with the real world around them. And lastly, you will want to make your narrator unreliable from the start. Unless it is important for us to see the narrator becoming unreliable. Let's say with the insane narrator, specifically Bucky Barnes. We see him before he becomes unreliable, before he becomes the Winter Soldier. Then we see him getting tortured, we see the immediate aftermath, and from there he becomes unreliable, should he be the one to tell the story. There's a clear reason that we need to see him before he becomes unreliable, before he becomes the Winter Soldier. Unless that is the case, you're going to want to make your narrator unreliable from the start. What you could do, let's say that your narrator wasn't unreliable throughout the whole course of their life, you could work with flashbacks to go back to the time before they became unreliable, to also show that side of them. But in the main plot, the current events, we're going to want to see them as they currently are, which is unreliable. The reasons behind it you can explain throughout the course of the story. We don't need to see them be the reliable narrator in order to understand it. Just them explaining their perspective on why they now maybe think the way that they do that makes them unreliable could be enough. Or a scene where another character talks about them before they became unreliable, before they start to show the behaviors that they do that makes them unreliable. It could be enough. Just that character talking about them to another could be enough to give us a clue as to what they were like before, if that is something that is relevant to your story. Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. But if the story is supposed to be told from the perspective of an unreliable narrator, we don't need to see them in the first half of the story being reliable. Unless, again, you have a valid reason, like with Bucky Barnes. If you want the reader to bond with a character that is unreliable, that is how you will have to portray them. You may give glimpses into what they would be like if they were reliable. And if you do feel that sometimes they are too unreliable and you need to balance it out, then maybe The issue is that you've made the character too unreliable in general, and you can't really balance it out with showing them as being completely reliable in some way, shape, or form. Maybe you just need to look at the character again and make them less unreliable in order to balance it out, and that could do the trick. But we want to see them as they currently are throughout the course of the story. We need to know what is relevant now, not in some hypothetical universe or in the past before they became unreliable. It gives us consistency, and consistency is what a reader wants and longs for. Otherwise, it can just get confusing. So that is all I have today on unreliable narrators. I hope that you enjoyed this video. I hope that this video was helpful to you and that you now know a little bit more on how to write an unreliable narrator. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing to my channel. If you have any more videos that you would like for me to make, let me know what they are in the comments down below. I will be back with another video next week, and I will see you then. Bye bye.